Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's a member of the January 6th investigation. He's chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, and I think you read that better than I did.
No, trust me, you did it better. I can check myself against the tape. But let me ask about that. I believe from my own research and own reporting on the history of the Justice Department, particularly when they're confronting serious contentions like sedition, like treason, like insurrection, that people with a lot of political power haven't often been held to account, specifically in the realm of criminal law. You are saying that that would be a travesty for the country and it would put us down the road toward giving up our democracy. Do you say that as a warning because you're worried that's what's going to happen? Or do you believe that we are on track to have a new kind of accountability where really nobody is above the law?
I certainly hope that it's the latter, that we're going to see a different kind of accountability where it doesn't matter what your position is or was, that you are treated equally before the law. But I am concerned about it. It's taken the Justice Department a long time to get to the point where it is. They moved quickly with respect to the foot soldiers who broke into the building and beat police officers, but they moved very slowly when it came to people higher up in the organization of this assault on our democracy. So I am concerned with it. And one of the reasons for a criminal referral by Congress is for accountability, and not just of the perpetrators, but accountability of our Justice Department and our justice system. The Justice Department, if they decide not to charge Donald Trump, doesn't actually have to go out and explain why. But the country now knows that Congress, certainly this committee, believes that he's committed criminal acts. And so the country will want to know, why isn't justice being done? And I do think that will cause the Department of Justice to think long and hard about these charges, about the evidence, and about the importance of making sure that presidents don't get a pass.
Congressman Schiff, it's Alex Wagner. Thanks for your time. And I just wanted to ask you about some of the witnesses that you made note of in the exhaustive report, specifically Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato. You say multiple times in the report that the committee found multiple parts of his testimony questionable. You also raise the specter of potential pressure on witnesses, and you raised Kayleigh McEnany and Mark Meadows as other witnesses who had less than forthcoming testimony, to be euphemistic about it. Is it your opinion that Donald Trump or his allies may have been pressuring these witnesses to say or not say certain things to the committee? And is that something the DOJ should investigate in terms of witness tampering?
I think the department should investigate these issues, and we are concerned about it. When a witness is told, basically, that the president or the former president is reading these transcripts, is basically told, we're going to know what you said, and that's going to matter, and also is given incentives like, hey, we've got this cushy job where you can live very comfortably, then yes, that's designed to influence that witness's testimony. Whether that goes across the line to be prosecutable will be up to the Department of Justice. But we did spell out, where we had serious questions about the credibility of witnesses, where it seemed to contradict other evidence. You mentioned Mr. Ornato, the idea that the head of the president's detail wouldn't know about any of the intelligence that the Capitol might be the subject of an attack on January 6th, when there were multiple streams of intelligence coming in, seems pretty far-fetched. He was either not being honest with the committee, or he was being incredibly negligent in the performance of his job.
Congressman Schiff, Ari Melber here. I wanted to ask about what we've learned from this probe. The New York Times today described this as one of the most significant congressional probes in the modern era, and I think that's partly because of the evidence. Lining that up with these 4 recommended charges today, I would note that 3 of them, the way the draft report is written, the excerpts you've released, suggest 3 of them are chargeable even had there been no violent insurrection. And I'm curious if you could walk us through with a little more detail now that Rachel and others, that we've laid out some of the overview. When did you in your investigation begin to realize that as horrific and terrible as the insurrection crime was, the violent attack on the Capitol, you were finding, according to this new material today, multiple other crimes that would be illegal, such as impeding the counting of the votes on the 6th, the Eastman coup plots, etc. They'd be illegal even had the insurrection never occurred. When did that cohere for you, and why is that important?
It's a great question, and it actually started to cohere fairly early in the investigation. When you talk about the unprecedented nature of what this committee did, let's think back to what we knew after the events of January 6th, though, almost 2 years ago. We really knew very little about Donald Trump's specific role. We knew nothing about the fake elector plot. We knew very little about this pressure campaign against state legislators. We didn't know how far it went. And so we know so much more about that now, and we began very early on to see that January 6th was not a date in isolation. It was the violent culmination of multiple and failed lines of effort to overturn the election. And only when all these other avenues failed did we see the president incite this mob in a last-ditch effort to stop the transfer of power.
Congressman Schiff, it's Joy Reid. This has been such a comprehensive investigation, and these conclusions are historic. Now that we've had a president who has been charged essentially with attempting to overturn, well, not essentially, with attempting an insurrection, aiding and abetting an insurrection. As legislators, have the members of the committee had conversations about what you might be able to do legislatively? Now that we've seen all the little soft spots in our constitutional republic, that Donald Trump tried them all, the Justice Department, the states, he tried every way of trying to overturn this election. Are there conversations about recommending potential legislative fixes to the Electoral Count Act, things that we can do to strengthen our democracy should there be another Donald Trump, somebody with the same proclivities to act against democracy?
Absolutely. And in the report that is going to be released, I think, on Wednesday, if all goes well, you'll see detailed recommendations of our committee as to the reforms needed to protect the country going forward. Among the foremost is a reform of the Electoral Count Act, which we may actually get done in the omnibus bill. We're still negotiating that. And this is that act, of course, that's more than a century old, that governs what takes place during the joint session, under what circumstances, and how you would challenge a slate of electors. But it's important to point out, even though that's a key recommendation of ours, that really wasn't the problem on January 6th. Luckily, the elections in these battleground states really weren't close. The allegations of fraud were completely bogus. This reform is trying to address something that could happen in the next election, and that is, what if it comes down to a single state, and what if it comes down to an interpretation of this old law? We'd be much better off if we set out clearly what's to happen in the joint session. But I also think, Joy, one of the most important reforms is one that we've been pushing for quite some time. It's part of the Protecting Our Democracy Act that I introduced, and it would allow for the expedited enforcement of congressional subpoenas. You're going to see that, some of the subpoenas we have outstanding and have been working on for months, aren't going to be effective before the end of this session. Donald Trump knew that. His allies knew that. They knew they could delay and essentially delay justice enough to deny it. We need reforms that will strengthen and speed congressional accountability, as well as many other reforms.
Congressman Schiff, it is Simone Sanders Townsend. I want to ask you about the Ethics Committee referrals that were detailed today in the summary. What is going to happen with those Ethics Committee referrals? In less than 16 days, Republicans will be in the majority in the House of Representatives, effectively in charge of the Ethics Committee, and I have to wonder if any of those Republicans will attempt to hold Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, or others who are named accountable.
It's a good question. And here we were wrestling with what's the proper remedy for members of Congress that violate their oaths, that are unwilling to show up when they're given a lawful subpoena in a legitimate investigation. And we weighed, should we refer them to the Justice Department? We did refer some of these people to the Justice Department for prosecution. We held them in criminal contempt. And when we did that, and here I'm talking not members of Congress, but others, we were only batting 50-50 with the Justice Department. It looked like that would be a potentially problematic remedy. And what's more, from the perspective of the separation of powers, it really ought to be Congress enforcing discipline among its own members. Now, the Ethics Committee is the one committee in Congress equally divided between the parties, so it shouldn't matter that much who's in the majority or the minority next year. We would hope that it would operate in a nonpartisan fashion, although I have to say the record of that committee in recent years has not been encouraging.
Congressman Schiff, I wanted to ask you about one little divide in both the written report and the public presentation today in today's public meeting in terms of criminal referrals. So there's these 4 charges that Congressman Raskin today explicitly described as referrals to the Justice Department for potential prosecution of the former president. But then there's 2 additional charges, including seditious conspiracy, that are mentioned in the introduction to the report. They're separate. They're cast as something that the Justice Department should look into, but they're sort of not described in the same way that those other 4 charges are. Why was there that divide? What's the distinction between the 4 charges where there is a referral and these other 2 that you're essentially commending to DOJ for their attention?
I think the difference is really this. With respect to the 4 charges that we enumerated and went through the evidence on, it was very clear what the evidence was as to each element of the offense. But we were also mindful that the Justice Department is in possession of evidence that we don't have. And there were other offenses that also may be chargeable, and we didn't want to neglect them. We didn't want to necessarily set out that we have all of the evidence that we need, but that the Justice Department may be able to fill in some of the pieces. So we wanted them to be included, and we were at great pains to say, hey, just because an individual isn't named doesn't mean there's not evidence that they may have engaged in criminality. Just because an offense hasn't been enumerated, it doesn't mean that the Justice Department shouldn't consider other offenses. This is not meant to be exhaustive. It is meant to be very careful. And we wanted to be able to, dot every I and cross every T in what we were recommending, because we understood just how unprecedented this situation is. And we went forward with it because our democracy was the victim of this attack, first and foremost, but it was also directed at the Congress, and we felt we had a responsibility to share our findings with the department.